Per. Hi. Welcome back. So it's been 4,000 years since I posted my last video. And welcome in case you are new and you're watching this video for the first time. Congrats, you found a basically dead channel and I'm doing my best to give it CPR. But now we're here and it's a completely different topic, but that's okay. And you're here to learn. And I'm here to educate you. It's the general US history video by yours truly. I will have a link down below listing all my sources on a Google Docs page. If I have something that's wrong, feel free to correct me. The year is 1492, and some random Genoese explorer named Christopher Colombo. Yeah, that needs to be spell checked. Gets sponsored by the latest and greatest Isabella I of Castile to find a new way to get to Asia. So Columbus sets sail and 5 weeks later he spots land. Well, actually, Rodrigo de Triana spots the land first, but then Christopher Columbus is like, listen here, you little shit, you're not gonna take away this credit from me. You're gonna fucking die. Fuck you! Where's my money, Isabella? Yeah, Columbus was an asshole. If this is the first time you're hearing this, yeah. Anyways, so when Christopher's magical discovery hit Europe, everyone was shitting and pissing themselves, and vomiting, and screaming and crying. Oh, sorry, it's actually the peasants. Meanwhile, every monarch was scrambling all the money they could get to just pour into new ships, into new designs, to new discoveries, to find their way into this new route to Asia. But lo and behold, it wasn't Asia. Oh, and the monarchs were also shitting themselves. Hygiene back then was shit on the streets. Spain, England, France, the Netherlands, Sweden, all these European countries rushed, got out of their little throne rooms and just went on a little discovery journey to the new world to find riches and glory, and they were totally the first ones to discover it. I mean, we're excluding millions of Native Americans who already lived there and have thriving civilizations since who knows when. Spain and Portugal, classic countries in Europe that didn't really have anything better to do, took up colonialism, crushed it, and fucking snorted it. Spain started settling areas like the Caribbean, South and Central America, and what is now the southwest of the US, and of course, Florida. Meanwhile, the Dutch were doing Dutch things like trading fur and buying the entirety of Manhattan for a whopping $24 US. Now that's a deal. And then being creative and naming it New, Amsterdam. England, being bored of having every settlement fucking die of starvation every time they set it up, started to rethink their planning, and they finally got a colony that actually survived for a bit. And that was Jamestown in Virginia, under the lead of the most generic named man, John Smith. England also took over the Dutch colonies and the little area that's now known as Manhattan. And they renamed that city to a whopping new creative name, because before it hadn't seen such creativity, New Amsterdam. But now it was called New York City. Damn, white people and their naming abilities. Over the years, each European power expanded their influence in the North American and South American regions while also brutally enforcing their religion upon the Native Americans or just hunting the Native Americans out of their own land. And those that didn't die because of brutal policies or religious extortionism died because of diseases brought over by the Europeans. People who were religiously persecuted in Europe then searched for a new land, aka the New World, where they would be free to religiously persecute other people. How the turntables. Colonies grew in population, mostly due to the slave trade from Africa, and also because of indentured servitude, a system where you'd basically pay for your trip to the New World by signing up for free labor for 7 years, and by the end of those 7 years, you'd get land. Except most of them didn't because they got mysteriously murdered or kidnapped before then. But the population grew. The 13 colonies, the British colony and the eastern seaboard of America, started gaining a large amount of people and also riches, mostly due to the exploitation of the slaves, especially in the South, Due to the combination of systematic exploitation and a constant influx of immigrants from other parts of the world, many parts of America became way more successful financially than parts of Britain by the 1700s. It's the 1750s, and there's this really teeny tiny problem in North America right now. France and Britain claim the same piece of land. Excuse me? Actually, this doesn't belong to either. Shh! Hush. So, in order to solve this really complex problem of, no, this is mine. No, this is mine. He decided to sit down and talk it out. Just peacefully come to an accord. I'm fucking kidding. Why would you believe that? They declared war on each other. The 7 Years' War had started. The conflict between France and Great Britain in North America is known as the French and Indian War. Both sides had Native American support, with France being more dependent on them since they didn't have as much manpower as Britain in the colonies. Most Native American tribes sided with the French since Great Britain was trying to take away their land. Again. That being said, Great Britain cares as much about Native Americans as FIFA cares about corruption and human rights. After all this time, after all these battles, the main question was, who was the better colonizer? And they came up with an answer. It's Great Britain. Great. Their reach on the American continent after this war was extended to a great amount, now going from Canada all the way down to the Mississippi River, including the entire eastern seaboard, except for Florida. That's Spain's problem. The British essentially tripled its territory in North America after the single war, and, even better yet, tripled its fucking debt. Now, King George III, the leader of Great Britain, who looks like his mom forgot him to pick him up at school at this picture, decided it was time to make the economy not go boo-boo anymore. His plan consisted of 3 very well thought through and thorough steps. And those were, step 1, tax the colonies. Step 2, tax the colonies. And step 3, fucking tax the... So he did, because he was a king and he could do that. No checks and balances there. The Stamp Act of 1765 was passed by the British Parliament, and it required that all newspapers, playing cards, and everything that was basically made from paper needed to be printed in a certain place in London and then sent out and paid for by the colonies. And you, a Quaker in Pennsylvania, had to pay for it. In response, the colonists came up with a nice little jingle. No taxation without representation. Which, in today's words, means, what the fuck are you doing, bitch? How dare you? The tax was so unpopular that Britain decided to repeal it a couple years later. And then they proceeded to put up, you guessed it, new taxes. New taxes. The townshend duties in 1767, which was a tax on glass, paint, paper, lead, and tea. And, of course, this did not please the colonists at all. In the following years, the tensions between the people living in the colonies and the British soldiers there enforcing the new laws became quite bad. As a form of protests, locals would go into stores and harass the store owners and carry their way into protesting, basically. That was their protest against the unfair taxes. This tension led up to the Boston Massacre of 1770, where people started clubbing... Oh, no, not that clubbing. The other one. The beating kind, yep. Making fun of and throwing snowballs at British soldiers. After a British soldier fell down, the company started firing into the crowd, leading to about 6 deaths, officially setting a new American tradition of public shootings. The news traveled quickly around the colonies, showing the British in a very unpleasant light and shifting the public opinion more against the British. Now, protests in the colonies against the British and their rule became way more often after that. But the most iconic out of all of them was obviously the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party in 1773 was not really a fun little get-together where people just talked about the problems over some delicious tea. No, it was where a bunch of patriots, just a fancy name for people who don't like the British, went into a boat and fucking dumped $1 million worth of tea overboard into the Boston Harbor. Now, if it's one thing the British take seriously, no, it's not food. It's their tea. Now, after seeing what happened in Boston, the British military closed down the entire port. All of the tea that was dumped was to be compensated for, and the military took direct control of the entire state of Massachusetts, which sparked a very huge controversy among the other states in the colonies. This led to the creation of the First Continental Congress, which tried to send a petition to the king to get him to kindly calm the fuck down, but after that didn't work, the Second Continental Congress convened in 1775 in order to set up a defense against the British. Revolution time! Revolution was kicked off by the Battle of Lexington and Concord in April 1775, when the British tried destroying a lot of the militia supplies in Massachusetts. While the British were partially successful in destroying their supplies, they were, however, pushed back by the militia. Under the lead of George Washington, the Patriots were able to drive out the British from Boston in 1776, officially giving a huge room full of white men in horrible wigs enough time to write the Declaration of Independence.
God damn it, Franklin, you brought the wrong wigs! Blend in, just blend in, they won't notice.
For the following 5 years, the U.S. militia army and the British army played what historians refer to as the most intense hide-and-seek game of all time. This intense hide-and-seek match included guns, weapons, and death. There were a couple times where it looked like the British were just about to win, but right at the end, thanks to those great French supplies and Britain having to go up against Spain, France, and the Netherlands back in Europe, the soggy old white men in that room with their wigs could finally be free. When it came to setting up a new form of government that didn't include a king at the top, there were two trains of thoughts in America at the time. One was making the states so independent from the Union that if someone dropped a quill in Pennsylvania, the entire Union would crumble. Or there's a more federalist approach to it, where the states in the Union still have their rights, but the overarching central government that they create, aka the Union, still has power over them. A lot of war veterans at the time were worried that the way the country was set up was way too fragile, and that the central government needed more power. So they convinced Congress to call the Philadelphia Convention of 1787, where they would set up a new constitution, where the central government had the power to tax people. That's a big one, considering the American people threw a whole revolution because of it, had a president, and had more centralized power. And to make all the anti-federalist people not go crazy with their flintlocks and everything, they also gave him the Bill of Rights in 1791, guaranteeing individual liberties to all American citizens, if you were white and a man. Congress was feeling very humane at the time. They decided to make the 3/5 compromise a thing, which gave slaves the right to be considered as 3/5 of a human and to be counted as such in population figures and voting figures, therefore giving Southern politicians way more political sway. Keep this in mind, folks. This is kind of a reoccurring theme in U.S. history. The topic of slavery then became geographically divided in the United States, with the northern states banning it in the following decades after the War of Independence, while the southern states were hooked on it for their entire economy and would basically do anything to keep that slavery money going into their pockets. After 20 years of hard thinking, Congress finally came to the realization that maybe kidnapping hundreds of thousands of people from another continent and shipping them over to be slaves in America was not okay. No, but they thought slavery was okay, just not outside slavery. It had to be American-made. Official blush spokesperson George Washington was now the first president of the United States, and he had such great accomplishments, leading the troops to victory in the Revolutionary War, setting up a strong central government that was recognized by Americans, and also being the leader of the land of the free while owning 317 slaves. With the help of his treasury secretary and #1 musical fan, Alexander Hamilton, his administration made it so that the Union assumed the state's debt. They set up the National Bank, the Bank of America, and propped up a system of uniform tariffs on imports to help pay off debt and create financial infrastructure. That support became then Hamilton's base to create a new party, the Federalist Party. Thomas Jefferson, the sworn enemy of Hamilton, and also fan of freedom while owning 600 slaves, was not having it, and so he created his own party, the Democratic Republican Party, with the help of his skeleton friend James Madison. The two-party system was born. After serving for 2 terms, George Washington stepped down and set the precedent for the peaceful transition of power. The question was, who would be the second president? Let's put it to a vote, everyone! Except if you're a person of color, or a woman, or if you just don't fit into the category of a white man. Anyways, who's it gonna be? Who's gonna be the president? Is it gonna be Federalist John Adams or Democratic Republican Thomas Jefferson? The results are in. Looks like Thomas ate shit. John Adams won. Congrats, you're the second president. And since Thomas Jefferson got second place after John Adams, he got to be the vice president. Yes, that's actually how the system worked. Don't worry though, that system will be changed very soon. Now this system of whoever gets the second most votes being the vice president stayed until Thomas Jefferson won in the tie-breaking 1800s election by a surprise M. Night Shyamalan endorsement from his enemy? Enemies to lover? Hamilton. He got an endorsement from Hamilton. Against the other presidential candidate, Aaron Burr, who was also Hamilton's friend. Gag. Now, Hamilton endorsing his long-sworn enemy over his longtime friend didn't really go so well for him. But the deed had been done. Thomas Jefferson was now the third president of the United States. He slashed military spending, cut back the budget, and started saving all the pennies he could, officially pulling back the United States debt by 1/3, and then going out and buying the entirety of the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon in 1803 for $15 million, officially doubling the size of the United States and setting the record for the fastest switching of gears in politics anyone has ever seen. Many expeditions were sent out, but the most famous expedition of them all was the Lewis and Clark expedition, where 2 pasty white men went out into the wilderness, drew what they saw, and they totally didn't get any help from a Native American woman who did all the heavy lifting. Meanwhile, Thomas Jefferson was so busy being so pro-freedom that he tried to fucking destroy the judicial system. Yet again, Thomas Jefferson ate shit. And all his attempts to weaken the judiciary of the United States were blocked by Federalist John Marshall, who officially defined what the role of the Supreme Court was in the United States. Thomas Jefferson was then followed by James Madison. Everything was gonna be okay. Nope. Actually, there's another war with Britain in 1812. And they creatively called it, you guessed it, the War of 1812. The War of 1812 is basically like the Revolutionary War, but an absolute flop. All the good US war veterans were dead, and the US military was flopping all over the place. The war started because the British were actually just capturing random American ships and sending them off to go fight in the Napoleonic Wars because they needed some men in the front line. They actually also wanted to set up a buffer state between the West Coast and the East Coast that was controlled by the Native Americans to stop the Americans from pursuing their westward expansion. Now, of course, the United States took this well and officially declared war the following day. To sum up the war, the Parliament building in Canada got torched, White House burnt, Native Americans in the West stomped yet again. And by the end of the war, both had lost so hard that both claimed that they won. Honestly speaking though, I don't think having your capital, aka the White House, being burned to the ground and having the First Lady run out with portraits of George Washington, I don't consider that you winning a war, but to each his own, I guess. The War of 1812 officially led to a shift in American politics. They needed to have a standing army that was able to protect them at all times. This eventually led to the affirmation of the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, proclaiming the United States' opinion that no European power or nation should interfere in the Americas ever again. This marks a shift in US foreign policy, from a more isolationist one to a more proactive one. The The aforementioned first party system was eroding in the 1820s, which made way for the second party's. Wow, congrats. When given the choice of who would succeed President James Monroe, the Jeffersonian Democratic Party dissolved faster than one of those McDonald's paper straws. The more traditional side of the party, that held on for dear life to those Jeffersonian values like freedom and having slaves, became the Democratic Party, officially led by the Count Dracula impersonator Andrew Jackson and the very first troll doll, Martin Van Buren. The opposition, under the leadership of Henry Clay, formed the Whig Party, which, in my opinion, is kind of a misleading name since apparently everyone was wearing wigs at the time, mama. After winning a duel by surviving a shot to the chest 1 inch away from his heart, and then turning around, standing back up, and 360 no-scoping the other duelist, therefore killing him, since he got shot in the head, Jackson went on to become the 7th President of the United States. After winning the election in 1829, Andrew Jackson, with the help of Congress, passed a new act. Can you guess what that act is called? It has something to do with Native Americans. Is it the Native American Let's Finally Treat Them Fairly Act? No, it's the Native American Removal Act. This act officially gave the president more power to negotiate terms with Native American tribes in order to get them to resettle west of the Mississippi River. Now, can you please do me a favor and remember those words, negotiate, talk peacefully, because that is exactly what Andrew Jackson didn't do. Andrew Jackson, who passed the law himself, only got those Native Americans away from their own land in form of bribery, theft, trickery, fraud, and extortion. And when someone tried assassinating Andrew Jackson at a funeral at the Capitol, both of the assassins' guns misfired. Reason being, the weather was too moist. Both guns misfired. Of course, Andrew Jackson returned the favor by beating the shit out of him with his cane. Fun fact, I was given the role of Andrew Jackson in my 3rd grade play when I was at a Christian school, and I was told that he was a great president. And fun fact, he's on the $20 bill. Wow. Imagine my reaction when I figured out that he was the reason that thousands of Native Americans got displaced and died, and he caused a trail of tears. Yeah. Fuck you, Andrew Jackson. He forcibly removed 10,000 Native Americans from their land, and 10% didn't even make it to their final destinations because of the horrendous conditions of the Trail of Tears. Even though this cost thousands of innocent lives, this policy still made Andrew Jackson popular at the time, since he freed up newfound land and sold it to American farmers for very cheap. This was due to the belief of manifest destiny, which was more widespread in America than syphilis at the time. Manifest destiny was the belief that American settlers were destined, ordained by God himself, to expand westwards by any means necessary. This belief, along with aggressive expansion, was mostly held by those in the Democratic Party at the time. Other people, like Henry Clay, who looks like he's a teacher, silently staring at you, waiting for you to just shut up so he can talk. He's being very passive-aggressive about it. And also, iconic hat wearer and bearer, Abraham Lincoln, were not really fans of those policies. And down to the south, the independent country, Texas, yes, it was a country, the Republic of Texas, won its independence against Mexico in 1836. And after 10 years of cozying up to Texas, winning a key election in 1844, the Democrats finally quenched their thirst for godly expansion and manifesting that destiny. Texas will join the United States as a state. The annexation of Texas led to the Mexican-American War of 1846, since Mexico still considered Texas to be part of their territory, but America kind of got dibs on that apparently, so it's war. And in a shocking twist, the Democrats were in complete favor of the war, even having ideas like annexing all of Mexico, until they realized they were racist, of course, because actually annexing Mexico into your territory means that you incorporate millions of people who are mixed race and not white, and that would undermine what the United States stands for as an exclusively white republic. Can you guys hear that? The freedom bell's ringing? Because I sure fucking can't. The war lasted for 3 years, ending in 1848 with a resounding American victory. And since incorporating all of Mexico was a little bit too progressive for the Democrats, they just decided to trim Mexico's hairline and take states like New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Wyoming, and Colorado. Now, if you seriously think that the United States would leave the Native Americans alone in this new territory they got from Mexico, you'd be sorely mistaken, because it only took about 2 seconds and finding a bit of gold in California before they committed another Native American genocide. This time, they systematically killed off about 100,000 Native Americans in California alone. The Manifest Destiny Ultimate Move button was running out of clicks, and the United States had one more go, and they used it to negotiate a treaty with the British because of the Northwest Territories. And as colonial powers always do, they just look at a map and find some sort of straight line, just draw it across half the continent, and say one side's yours, one side's mine, that's great, let's call it a day, we're done here. While all this Manifest Destiny was going on externally, internally the United States was facing a huge debate, and that was slavery. Now, the issue of slavery would be the thing that would bring the United States as a whole to a breaking point in the future. The tension between the pro-slavery South and the abolitionist North only grew worse after 1848. Northerners mostly thought that slavery was a sin and wanted to stop the spread into new states or completely abolish it. Meanwhile, a lot of Southerners weirdly argued that slavery was humanitarian because it gave the slaves a job, and if we were to abolish it, then economy go boo-boo and big white man no more $1 million anymore. And of course, as everyone knows, when you're being beaten within an inch of your life every single day, you have nothing to eat, your kids are dying, the living conditions are so bad they should be called death conditions, no one considers you human, and you are just property. In that situation, the thing that is on the top of your mind is, damn, I really hope I don't lose my forced labor job. On the religious side of things, many different churches had different beliefs and thoughts on slavery. Mostly Methodists and Quakers were against slavery, while Lutherans, Episcopals, and Catholics, of course, were largely ignoring the problem, if not pro-slavery, which officially just adds another one to the long list of problems they have. A compromise between the two sides would be made in 1850, creatively called the Compromise of 1850. The compromise would add California as a free state, while adding Utah and New Mexico as slave states, officially keeping the very delicate balance in Congress between abolitionists and pro-slavers. One thing was enforced, though: the Fugitive Slave Act, which forced all the northern states to cooperate in getting back escaped slaves from the South. So even if you escaped the South as a slave, you were not free. Now, the earlier compromise of 1820, nope, not the 1851. I need you to concentrate with me right now, okay? That one was repealed. It was replaced by the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which officially gave voters in a state the choice. Now, this looks like something that would totally work and would totally not lead to any violence at all, right? Well, considering that the next event is called Bleeding Kansas, I wouldn't be so sure. As a reaction to this, the abolitionists rushed and formed a new political party called the Republican Party, officially putting the suffering and old and just stale Whig Party out of its misery. Anyway, so the old Barnhouse, Moo Moo Meadows state of Kansas finally had more people than cows, but these people were fired up, angry abolitionists and slavers at the same time who came from all over the United States to the state of Kansas to vote on whether it should become a free state or slave state. Now, both sides didn't really end up voting as much as they did stabbing and shooting each other. By the late 1850s, the Electoral College was dominated by Republicans who just wanted to see slavery die out and go extinct. Southern states, who were completely economically dependent on depravity and immorality, were getting dangerous ideas about, let's not be part of this union anymore. It's just not working for us. It's me, not you. I mean, no, it's you. It's not, no, it's you. It's not me. I'm perfect. You're the problem. And even when the Republican candidate, Abraham Lincoln, got elected in 1860, he promised to keep slavery legal in the South, just not to spread it. And he even had a vice president that was of the opposing party. But the South was not having it. They wanted slavery everywhere and in everything. So they separated faster than your parents did. Now the border between the southern and the northern states had been drawn, but Virginia, or specifically a small part of Virginia in the west, was not really feeling very southern. So they decided to secede from the people who seceded, and boom, West Virginia was born. The Civil War started in 1861, when Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter in South Carolina, officially making it the first time something ever happened in South Carolina. In response, Abraham Lincoln pleaded and asked the states to recapture the forts in a last-ditch effort to save the Union. But it was too late. Both sides went into the war thinking, you know what, in a month or so, the other side, they're going to be completely gone. And the general public was so certain that this little war was so fun and entertaining, they just couldn't help but bust out those picnic blankets and invite friends and family to just watch those new and exciting battles. In a shocking turn of events, the battle was not fun nor lovely. It was very bloody. And the war was not short. It was long and brutal. The early battles were won by the Confederacy, mostly due to incompetent Union generals, but after the first 2 years, the Union got its shit together and things started to turn in favor for the Union. The Confederates were slowly being pushed out of the border states, and the West was slowly being cleaned up. During all of this, France and Great Britain were considering supporting the Confederate States of America because cotton makes economy go boom boom. In order to stop the French and British from intervening, Abraham Lincoln warned that he would issue the Emancipation Proclamation if the Southern states did not stop fighting by 1863. This would officially free all slaves and make the official war goal of the Union to stop slavery in the South. The Southern states kept fighting in 1863, so Abraham Lincoln went through with his promise. Since now the entire world knew that the war was about slavery, it would kind of look bad on France's and Great Britain's resumes if they would officially help a slave state. Not long after, in July 1863, the Union officially captured the entirety of the Mississippi River, splitting the Confederacy in two. This was the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. Union naval ships were blockading and starving them out of supplies. The Mississippi River was captured, the West was lost, and now there was a crazy Union general named Sherman going around the South, burning everything that was shiny and made money. This led to the final attempt of the Confederates to win the war in the Appomattox Campaign, but that was about as successful as this first submarine they built that killed all of the people that stepped inside it, like 4 times. The Civil War had finally come to an end after about 750,000 casualties and about 5 years of fighting. The Reconstruction era followed, and it lasted from 1865, from the end of the Civil War, until the late 1870s. In that time, the main focus of the United States was to build back after the Civil War, regain the trust from the rebelling states, and to prevent a future civil war from happening. The freed slaves, also known as freedmen, now faced severe displacement, unemployment, and hunger. In response, the Freedmen's Bureau was created in the South in order to alleviate the freedmen, help them find temporary shelter, food, and jobs. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, also known as the Reconstruction Amendments, were finally passed, and it made it illegal for someone to be disenfranchised because of their skin color. It guaranteed every man the right to vote, and it made slavery illegal. Things were finally looking up for once. Like Abraham Lincoln when he realized that he got shot by Confederate actor John Wilkes Booth in the theater. Lincoln died a few hours later due to being shot in the head, and his Democratic Vice President Andrew Jackson took over, but he was about as powerful as Scotch tape since a majority of Congress was controlled by the Republican Party. Ex-Confederate leaders were banned from holding any public office, but after the 1870s, they said, you know what, guys? Let's forgive and forget. Let's live, laugh, and love together, even if you killed people and were pro-slavery. That's okay. Hold public office. And they sure did live, laugh, love so hard that the new formed Democratic coalition gained all political offices in the South by 1877. A new white supremacist terrorist group formed, which was called the Ku Klux Klan. They emerged and terrorized the black community for the following decades by burning their homes, by killing their leaders, and killing innocent people just because of their skin color. The new president and former Union military general, Ulysses S. Grant, which looks like he's very disappointed in you that you dropped out of college, went hard against the Ku Klux Klan, officially enacting a Ku Klux Klan Act of 1870, officially banning the first Ku Klux Klan. Yes, you heard me right. There's many, many more. Other white supremacist groups like the Red Shirts and the White League were still out and proud and openly using intimidation to suppress the black vote. The disputed election of 1876 was resolved by giving the Republican nominee the presidency, and they would officially withdraw all troops that were in the South, ending the Reconstruction era. Not long after, the United States passed its first exclusionary immigration law, banning all Chinese people from immigrating unless they were students or businessmen. And in classic Southern tradition, they legislatively did their utmost to disenfranchise black voters and poor white voters, in making voting registration as hard as possible, requiring a literacy test and a tax return on people who have been systematically deprived of gaining wealth and education for hundreds of years. But that wasn't enough for them. They needed to go another step. They needed to enact segregation, separating white people from black people, also known as the Jim Crow laws that lasted for almost 100 years in the United States. The following decades saw rapid development and growth of the West, attracting immigrants from all around the world and the United States. Back then, you would take this crazy wagon trail and probably die of dysentery along the way, but now you can go from coast to coast, east to west, with the first transcontinental railway that was mostly built by Chinese and Irish immigrants. It was time for innovation. The lonely island of Great Britain had experienced rapid industrialization. Factories, machines, trains, new things that could kill 100 people in 2 seconds, all these crazy new inventions that were just making life better, and times were a-changin'. Now, Britain had this weird quirk of just exporting everything, like their horrible food taste, themselves, and also the ideas of the industrialization. These ideas came flooding into the US, leading to following years of modernization and rapid industrialization, along with many new inventions in the United States itself. In the following decades, the United States transitioned from an agriculture-based economy to a more city-centered, factory-based economy. Surely, with all these new great inventions, we just use them for good, right? Oh my fucking god, I almost died because of that lie. Well, actually, the US started another 40 wars with Native Americans, and that's not even an exaggeration. While we're on the topic of war, the US also blamed the Spanish for sinking a ship called the USS Maine, a ship that the Spanish most likely probably didn't even touch or see, but it was used as justification to declare war on Spain and intervene in the Cuban War of Independence, marking another era of American imperialism. The US victory in that war led to the acquisition of territories in the Philippines, Guam, and in Puerto Rico, while liberating the Cubans from Spanish rule, although under the very watchful eye of the United States government. Some in the United States argued that maybe having territories and doing all this imperialism stuff is very unbecoming of democracy, but the United States just didn't care. Anything to be part of the big boys club, am I right? This included overthrowing the Kingdom of Hawaii, annexing it later, sending an entire fleet to Japan and threatening them to open their borders or they will face mass destruction by the Navy ships, and also colonizing a part of Africa called Liberia and sending freed slaves over there. Not only did industrialization enable modern imperialism, but it also created things like billionaires, millionaires, and monopolies. With the immense accumulation of wealth and their economy-dominating monopolies, certain individuals like J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller became arguably more powerful than the government with their monopolies. And with power comes abuse. Yeah, you finished the quote wrong there, didn't you? That's the Spider-Man thing. These companies and industries had horrific policies, which included things like child labor, horrible working conditions, and low pay, which led to a bigger gap between the wealthy and the poor. A lot of these companies even discriminated. No surprise there. They even considered Irish people to not be white enough for them. These horrible conditions and the rising inequality and poverty led to the rise of ideas like communism, anarchism, and the labor movement, which scared the shit out of these CEOs, because if it's one thing they can't handle, it's workers' rights. These problems and conflicts rose alongside with the industrialization of the country, and these problems would stay with the United States into the new century and well into the progressive era. The growing dissatisfaction from the middle class and lower class for these very few reasons led to the rise of the progressive movement in the late 1890s, a movement that pushed for the modernization of politics, medicine, and the old crusty, dusty, corrupt institutions. Both political parties, Democrats and Republicans, started running on a more progressive agenda, most notably Theodore Roosevelt and later on Woodrow Wilson. Journalists who expose the corruption behind businesses and institutions, also known as muckraking journalists, because they would, reveal the turds of corruption behind everything, gave the progressive movement a good boost into implementing new laws against corruption, regulating industries, and setting a new standard for companies. Even though he looks exactly like the Monopoly Man, Theodore Roosevelt was big on busting up monopolies, officially giving him the name at the time of Trust Buster, which now sounds like something else. Oh, and he also liked making national parks. There was nothing he couldn't regulate or update. Ridiculously high railroad prices? Regulated and updated. Lead, charcoal, and baby hands in your canned food? Regulated and updated. Bribery and fraud in the US Postal Department? Regulated and updated. American football rules and rules in martial arts? He tried. If it's one thing Theodore Roosevelt was, it was determined. So much so that when a delusional shopkeeper shot Theodore Roosevelt, believing that the dead ghost of President McKinley told him to do so, he just took the bullet, realized he wasn't bleeding out of his mouth, so he didn't get shot in the lungs, and then decided to refuse immediate medical attention and just, continue his 90-minute speech. Now, a big part of the progressive movement was women's suffrage. It might sound like it's a push for women to suffer. Trust me, it's not. And they already were. The feminist movement had seen some activity in the 1850s with people such as Susan B. Anthony and Lucy Stone. And leading up to the new century, many Western states granted women the right to vote and gave women the right to own property, child custody. But the entirety of the United States needed some catching up to do. Around 1912, the feminist movement experienced a sort of reawakening, and suffragettes were pushing for full equality this time, arguing that corruption had gotten so bad that men just weren't able to do their jobs correctly. And honestly, slay. Protests became more public, and by 1917, basically every major US city had seen a huge feminist movement or protest. The main opposition, as always, came from the South because, you guessed it, they were scared that black women were going to vote, and to the South's deep disappointment, the 19th Amendment was officially passed in 1919, giving all women the right to vote in the United States. Keep in mind that just because this amendment was passed does not mean that women face the same rights as men did, or that they didn't face extreme sexism and degradation. The push for true equality between men and women still hasn't been corrected to this very day in the Western world. Black women especially suffered under this, since they were discriminated against for their sex and their skin color. So keep in mind that early feminist movements didn't necessarily have warm and cozy feelings towards black women. While the push for women's suffrage was taking place internally in the United States, a world war had started in Europe in 1914, just because some royal driver decided to take a wrong turn into the wrong neighborhood with the crown prince in his car. While sides had been picked and lines had been drawn in Europe, America did not really feel the need to intervene in yet another European affair. Besides, they're a whole ocean away. We could just, I don't know, stay back, relax, make money off of both of them, you know? Meanwhile, the Europeans were going crazy, blowing each other up with all new sorts of inventions, like the machine gun, more efficient artillery, flamethrowers, early bombers, spicy gas, square box tanks, and submarines. They were having so much fun blowing each other up with all those crazy new inventions that they even called it the Great War because it was so great. Or they called it the war to end all wars. Although I think they got a little bit ahead of themselves. They didn't realize they had a sequel coming up. The German Empire, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire were part of the Central Powers in Europe, while Great Britain, France, and Russia were part of the Entente Powers in Europe. Meanwhile, Italy was in the middle, playing musical chairs. The Eastern Front, which included the Germans and Austrians against the Russians, did not look so good for the Russians, since they were basically using farm tools, vodka, and, I don't know, snow to fight the Germans, and they ended up conceding a lot of land and having a peace treaty in 1917 with Germany due to a collapsing government and a communist uprising. The Western Front, on the other hand, did not see much movement at all. After the Germans partially pushed into Belgium, a stalemate had stopped both sides, and thanks to trench warfare, both sides lost about 4 billion men for pushing the front line about 4 meters back and forth. At this point, public opinion in America and the Wilson administration just did not want to have any part of this war, unless it meant selling stuff, which they would gladly do, and probably became a prominent financial superpower because of that. But due to the astonishing high score of making bad decisions, Germany decided to pursue a policy of sinking every ship they saw in the ocean, which was also called unrestricted submarine warfare, in an effort to stop the supplies from getting to the Entente. The tiny problem there is they might have sunk a couple of passenger ships, including the Lusitania, which included 128 American citizens on board. While this definitely swayed the public opinion in America, the Wilson administration was still adamant about staying neutral. But Wilson's hand was forced when yet another German fuck-up came about. The British exposed a German message to Mexico that offered Mexico all of its land returned to them if they helped Germany invade the United States. At this point, Woodrow couldn't Wilson his way out of it. He then declared war with the help of Congress in 1917. The war ended not long after, in 1918, due to the German population revolting because of starvation and overthrowing the German Kaiser. While the French and British and Russians had faced mass destruction, a lot of bombings, mass casualties, and 4 years of brutal war, the United States basically just sent over a couple troops, a couple supplies, and free refills, so they had different ideas of peace talks with Germany. While the French and British were keen on kicking Germany in the balls so hard they would never be able to stand up again nor see someone, the United States had more of a neutral approach, wanting to set up a system of powers that wouldn't end up with tens of millions of deaths next time. This goal was further elaborated in Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, in which he described how this balance of powers would be set up. Nonetheless, the Treaty of Versailles was still signed, and the harsher terms were made official. Woodrow Wilson also pushed for the creation of the Justice League. The League of Nations, which was an international organization that would settle disputes and prevent another world war from happening. And then the US promptly failed to join it. Yeah, which is kind of like just making a group chat and then immediately leaving. For all of those asking what happened to the other Mika you just saw, well, he's fucking dead. While Europe was digging graves for millions of dead soldiers and cleaning up all the dust, crust, and rubble from World War I, the US was having a good old time, and by good old time I mean banning alcohol. Many thought that alcohol was the reason that men were so shitty and just so incompetent, but they were surprised to find out that that's just the men. Alcohol has nothing to do with it. And by banning alcohol, they unintentionally created the most iconic and successful era of organized crime, the black market, and worst of all, the fedora. Cars were driving faster, credit cards were being swiped, and the underground alcohol business was going through the roof. Or should I say, under the roof. But over the roof. Secret parties that had alcohol and fun new little costumes were just the bee's knees. That is such an old metaphor. Secret parties that had alcohol and fun little costumes were now very in. In fact, it was so fun that even the FBI decided to join and poison gallons and gallons of alcohol, probably killing more people than alcohol ever did. Not only were government institutions getting on the crimes, but also normal people like Al Capone, one of the most notorious organized crime leaders of the era. And he finally proved to everyone that what we see on the outside can just be as ugly as what's on the inside. His list of crimes is a long and very, very horrible one, but funnily enough, he was able to cover all of that up, cover all of his tracks for murders, for assassinations, but somehow he could just not get his finger on taxes, and forgot that tax evasion is actually a crime. And since the government couldn't technically prove that he murdered like half of Chicago, they just decided to send him to jail for 22 counts of tax evasion. 22? Damn. The 1920s saw rapid economic growth and boom in the United States, and therefore it was called the Roaring Twenties, to the great satisfaction of furries worldwide now and back then. During this time, jazz became popular. And then also the second Ku Klux Klan. Another American tradition. And immigration laws were being passed so that now the immigrants face discrimination at the border instead of just inside the United States. But, as you all know, what goes up must come crashing down sometime. The Roaring Twenties roared so hard early on that by the end of their 20s, it sounded more like a crying yelp. All that credit card swiping, ass shaking, and partying came to a grinding halt when the inflated stock market crashed on October 29th, 1929. The only thing dropping faster than those stocks were the businessmen from New York City buildings when they realized that they lost all their money. I'm just pulling your leg. They didn't throw themselves off buildings. That's an urban myth. They actually just poisoned themselves or just blew their brains out. The stock market crash was so bad in the United States that it reverberated around the world and practically plunged the entire world into a Great Recession and then a Great Depression. Except for the Soviet Union, because you can't break an economy that never started. Nonetheless, many Americans went to the Soviet Union in search of a better life and a job, since the unemployment rate had skyrocketed to a whopping 33% in the United States by 1933. Unbeknownst to the people moving to the Soviet Union for a better life and jobs, they would probably find themselves on their knees in some basement getting shot by some Soviet official because they just didn't worship Stalin enough. Anyways, back to America. The 1932 presidential election in the United States was one of many great policy shifts. The Democratic nominee Franklin Delano Roosevelt promised a New Deal to the American people, and he sure did give them one after he was voted into office. The New Deal was a set of domestic policies aimed at alleviating the pain that the American people were feeling during the Depression, which finally brought the thought of the government actually maybe helping its people for once into the American political sphere. The reforms included all of these: relief for the unemployed, Social Security, public housing, assistance for the elderly, bankruptcy and unemployment insurance, jobs for young men, farm subsidies, and last but not least, regulating financial security in the banks, aka the entire reason the crash even happened.
And that was just the first one.
The second New Deal in 1936 gave unions some sort of power and also ensured some labor laws through the Wagner Act. Sadly, his series of relief programs came to a grinding halt because of the conservatives in the Supreme Court and Congress. Nonetheless, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was one of the United States' most popular presidents, leading the country through tough times like the Great Depression and later on World War II, while also winning 4 consecutive elections with a landslide majority. Although he helped the country a lot, I think I think you're smart enough to know that every US president has got some skeletons in their closet. He let state governments deport up to 1 million American-born Mexicans. He didn't really make it easy for Jewish people to escape the Nazi regime in Germany, and he was also responsible for signing the executive order that racially discriminated against Japanese Americans and forced them to live in internment camps for the entirety of the war. Weirdly enough, the United States didn't really discriminate against the Germans like they did with the Japanese. But then again, if they did, then that's like 80% of the country. We haven't checked on Europe in a bit. I hope they're doing okay. Maybe they're just rebuilding after that war. You know, it's been a couple years, but I don't think they're gonna... Never mind, they're fighting. More specifically, many democratic nations fell to fascist dictatorships like Italy and Germany, and also Spain. In particular, Germany, who was pursuing a very aggressive anti-Semitic, anti-racial, basically anti-everything that wasn't perfect to this one mustached man with crushed arch dreams and serious drug problems. This man was the leader of Germany, and his name was Adolf Hitler, and he was going around asking every country for land because he felt like it. The French, and especially the British, were not so keen on fighting yet another war, so like a bad parent, they gave in to every single one of Germany's demands, and every time they asked for land, they were given it. And funnily enough, whenever someone's land was being taken away, there was always a conference, but it never included the country from which the land was being taken from. Interesting. During this time, many around the world and in the US were very fond of what the Nazis were doing. So much so that many of them made a lot of money from it. Even the English prince, Charles Edward, was a fan of the Nazis. Anti-Semitic sentiments and actions in this time were very widespread. Public attitudes in the United States towards Germany went down the drain yet again after Germany decided to invade Poland in 1939 after telling them explicitly that they wouldn't invade. And this officially started the sequel that everyone had been waiting for, but actually not really, World War II. The United States yet again wanted to stay out of the war. But they did provide France and Great Britain with a metric shit ton of food and supplies. And also a lot of money. While Europe fell firmly under the grasp and terrifying rule of Nazi Germany, the Japanese Empire was having dreams of crippling the United States and finally dominating the entire Pacific. The Japanese Empire saw a chance to cripple the US Navy once and for all, and they tried it. They attacked the Navy base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii in December 1941, with the aims of trying to deplete the United States of its oil resources and trying to damage or sink most of their capital ships that were based there. Luckily for the US, the Japanese bombers were about as effective at completing the objective as Overwatch 2 damaged players. The bombings killed about almost every person that was stationed on the island, about 2,000 Americans, and they sunk some capital ships, but they completely missed the oil reserves. And of course, when you surprise attack someone, they're gonna declare war on you. So the following day, the United States declared war on the Japanese Empire, and for some reason, the Germans felt personally offended by that and decided to declare war on the United States for absolutely no reason. This officially led to the entrance of the United States in World War II, both in the Pacific Theater and the European Theater. The same year, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, a high-casualty front that experienced one of the most intense fighting during the entire war, but ultimately led to a German loss. Because just like Napoleon, they forgot to pack their North Face winter jackets when invading the tundra that is Russia. 1943 was when the tides began to turn in favor of the Allies. Germany was being pushed out of Russia by the Soviet Union, the African campaign pushed Italy and Germany out of Africa, and the Allies had firmly set foot on the Italian peninsula. The next year, the Allies successfully invaded Normandy, France, and were able to push and capitulate the Germans the following year with the help of the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Theater, the United States was leapfrogging from one island to the next, having intense battles on each and in the ocean against the Japanese Empire. The United States was slowly gaining the upper hand towards the end of the war, and was at one point ready to invade the home islands of Japan. But why invade the island and lose so many lives of soldiers if you can just drop a huge new bomb that you invented on the civilians and kill hundreds of thousands of civilians, violate who knows how many Geneva Convention rules, and do that twice? After the horrific aftermath of the 2 atomic bombs, the Japanese Empire officially surrendered in 1945 to the United States, officially ending World War II. Back in Europe, the Allies found the horrific concentration camps and mass graves that Nazi Germany had set up and used to exterminate millions and millions of unwanted people from their society. These would include Jewish people, anyone who was accused of being Jewish, political opponents, LGBTQ plus people, people with disabilities, or basically anyone that breathed a word of dissent. These millions of women, men, and children were systematically killed, executed, or worked to death in these horrific camps. They were shot in mass graves, poisoned in showers, or hanged, or executed, or worked to death. And after that, they were robbed of any valuable possessions they had on themselves. This state-sponsored civilian genocide led to the deaths of up to 10 million people. The few who survived until the end of the war were then freed by the Allies, except for gay men, who were then sent to prison or given the choice to chemically castrate themselves, since the view that the Allies had and the Nazis had about homosexuality was, in the end, not that different. Another fact that the textbooks just forget to mention. Now the war was over, and the time to rebuild worldwide was upon us again. But this time it would feature an intense ideological battle between 2 superpowers that emerged from the war, the United States and the Soviet Union. Having learned from not joining the first international organization aimed at stopping world wars from happening and it later failing, the United States finally decided, you know what, I'm actually going to join this time. And they did. They joined the United Nations, the new organization for preventing worldwide conflict. The United States also had a case of Red Scare, and its primary goal was to follow a foreign policy of containment, which meant doing anything to stop the spread of communism. And in the United States' eyes, the now devastated Europe was very susceptible to communism. So in order to stop the spread of communism in Europe, the United States decided to pass the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan pumped billions and billions of dollars into Western Europe to help rebuild and also to secure anti-communist allies. The plan was worth $13 billion and was offered to any European country that wanted it, basically. Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, prohibited any of his satellite states in Eastern Europe, including East Germany, from taking any of that evil, greedy capitalist money. Because of that decision, many Eastern European countries fell behind when it came to economic prosperity and development, in comparison to its Western counterparts. Being against military alliances in peacetime for all its history, the United States decided to suddenly switch course and found NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in 1949. In response, the Soviet Union founded the Warsaw Pact, its own military alliance. From that point on, many called the divide in Europe between communist and non-communist countries in Europe the Iron Curtain. In August 1949, the Soviet Union finally tested its first successful atomic bomb, thereby escalating and assuring risk of mutual destruction. But because of that risk, it actually prevented the United States and the Soviet Union from declaring war on each other the entire time. Instead, they just did it through other countries, and the war was cold. The first location was Korea. The communist North was supported by the Soviet Union, while the capitalist South was supported by the United States. The Civil War also featured a crazy US general under the name of Douglas MacArthur, who had the bright idea of carpet bombing the entirety of Korea with atomic bombs, and also Asia because, why not? He also looks like a pantsuit model. The Korean War ended in a stalemate in 1953, and since technically the peace treaty was never really signed, that technically means that North Korea and South Korea have been at war for a whopping 70 years now. It's gotta be a world record. The new US president and egg, Dwight D. Eisenhower, cut military spending, supporting more long-range options like missiles and nukes, and gave strong support to NATO and its allies. And when the evil villain mustache guy Joseph Stalin finally died in 1953, Eisenhower worked together to find better solutions and have better relations with the Soviet Union. He put an end to McCarthyism, which was a fun period of time in American politics where everyone was scared that someone was secretly a communist. You like government support? Communist. You support workers' rights? Communist. You like the color red? Communist. This actual witch hunt ended in the 1950s, but it is very much alive and thriving and part of the American political sphere up into modern politics. In 1957, the Soviet Union sent the first satellite into space. Into space? Into space, not space. And this could not stand. No, the US has to win. So, the space race began. The Soviet Union put the first satellite, the first human, and the first dogs into space. But then the United States put the first people on the moon and somehow won the space race, although I think the score says otherwise. In 1960, John F. Kennedy became the new president of the United States, and his administration saw many events, including the end of the space race, the escalation of the Vietnam War, the attempted secret US invasion of Cuba, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and putting Martin Luther King in jail. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest the Earth came to becoming the temporary star of the solar system. In short, the Soviet Union had missiles pointing at the US from communist Cuba, and the United States had missiles pointing at the Soviet Union in Turkey. And that was a problem. The two leaders combined their last two active brain cells and decided to maybe not make humanity go extinct because of this, and to remove the nukes. Anyways, John F. Kennedy made the horrific decision of visiting Texas, and then got greeted in the head by a sniper bullet while on a motorcade in Dallas. The assassination was also televised and sent shockwaves through America and the world. You cannot imagine how fast the Soviet Union called the United States to tell them that it was not them that killed the president, so who was it? In the end, it was an apparent lone gunman that did the job, and he, weirdly enough, got assassinated too on his way to court one day. Yeah. John F. Kennedy's assassination is a widespread debate in the United States, with up to 80% of Americans believing that it was a cover-up. And 80% is astonishing. Like, there's nothing else that 80% of the American people would agree on. While the Cold War events were going on, big political movements were happening inside the United States. In case you forgot, the United States was still doing this thing called racial segregation, especially in the South. These policies were challenged by the Civil Rights Movement, which included leaders like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X. Protests, boycotts, and many other forms of peaceful protests were implemented by the Civil Rights Movement for many, many, many years before things started to look up. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, and Fair Housing Act of 1968 finally ended the 100-year reign of Jim Crow. Of course, Jim Crow being ended didn't mean that racial discrimination nor racially motivated crimes had an end. Discrimination always finds a way, and it is a problem that America still deals with to this day. Whether it's through police brutality, housing discrimination and redlining, or the justice system. And as a demonstration of how America reacts to social progress, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968 and Malcolm X in 1965. After 1968, the main political movement shifted towards women's liberation. Thousands to millions of women protested in order to get the same rights that men had. They worked to end marital rape and spousal abuse, and worked to liberate women's bodies, gaining abortion rights, trying to put an end to employment and pregnancy discrimination. Of course, this is yet another problem that the United States struggles with to this very day, and in some parts of the United States, it is even worse now than it was back then. Back to the Cold War. The Cold War would end in the country where the battling and showing off of capitalism versus communism was the most intense. In Germany. Many people living in East Germany and East Berlin, seeing the standard of living that West Berliners had, decided to escape and flee to the western side of things. So many people were leaving the Soviet Union and its satellite states and moving to the west that the Soviet Union decided to put a stop to it once and for all, and built a huge ass wall in the middle of Berlin, setting up many military personnel and demanding that they shoot anyone who leaves or tries to leave to the west. This, of course, led to flared tensions between the East and the West, But even though there was heavy risks involved, many people still sacrificed and risked everything to get to the other side. This division between East and West Germany, as well as East and West Berlin, would come to an end in 1989, when the Berlin Wall was taken down by protesters on both sides, and the reunification of Germany was official. No more East and West Germany now, just normal Germany. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a symbolic precursor to the crumbling and the fall of the Soviet Union, which decided to explode and stop existing in 1991, thus officially ending the Cold War. Oh, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. It was a lot of work. If you enjoyed it, feel free to share it to anyone you know and to spam them. I don't know, send your grandma this video just randomly. Just mid-conversation, just send her the link to this video and be like, watch this. Man with makeup, talk about history. And yeah, feel free to subscribe, like, and yeah. Once again, all of my sources will be down in the description below. I will have a Google Docs with all my sources, and feel free to look through all of the sources. They are a very interesting read. And yeah, you better fucking share this video. I swear to God, if you don't, I'm gonna do something. That's not a really good thread, is it?